Kia ora koutou, everyone. Welcome to our panel on decolonising the database. With a topic like this, a topic like decolonising, removing the colonial ideology, there's lots of different ways we could tackle this and many discussions that could take place. Today's panel, we're hoping to deal with the database end of it, and it's just one small part of an overall process. So our panelists will be discussing different ways that their organizations have been removing the roots of colonization and how they've been prioritizing Indigenous voices in their cataloging. In particular, they'll be looking at lessons learned and ways that they're hoping to move forward. Our panel today is particularly going to be focusing on the voices of the Tangata Whenua and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. I would like to acknowledge that colonization has harmed and does continue to harm many Indigenous communities and First Nations around the world. And while our panel is not focused on these powerful emotions and pain that it has dealt with, some of this may come up, and I apologize in advance if it opens any wounds for anyone or makes anyone feel uncomfortable. That is not our intention, but it is something we're planning on talking about today. And we hope that it can be part of a healing process. So our panelists will be having a few minutes to talk about a project they've been doing or some insights they've gained around the topic of decolonizing. And then we're going to have some discussion time. So if you have any questions, please leave them in the general chat and I'll be keeping an eye on it, and so will Cherry. So you can forward it to us and we'll be bringing it up with our panelists. Right, so our panelists today are Anne Harlow from Otago Museum, Chanel Clark from Auckland War Memorial Museum, Gareth Seymour, who's representing Ngā Taonga, and Linda Connolly, who's representing ACME, our Australian brother. Right, hello everyone, hope everyone's had a good day. I thought we'd jump straight into Anne. You begin with the letter A, so you get to go first.
That happens a lot. Okay.
Don't mind giving an overview of yourself and of around the topic.
Sure. Thanks, Lisa. Kia ora koutou, ko Anne Harlow taku ingoa, no Otepoti aho. I'm the Collection Manager of Humanities at Otago Museum, and I have been for nearly 4 years. I've worked in a few museums and art galleries around the country, and I've also worked for Vernon for a couple of years in the UK, which was an amazing experience. So it's a pleasure to be a part of this panel. Thank you for inviting me, Lisa. So Otago Museum, as you know, is one of the big old ones of our country. It was established in 1868, and for much of its history it was managed by the university. So there's those academic links, and there still are now. Also, I'm sorry I don't have a presentation, so you can either look at me or the penguins. So I hope that's okay. We have over 1.5 million objects. In the humanities, we've got things from Mesopotamia all the way up to these fabulous contemporary ceramics by Jim Cooper. And in the natural science collection also is vast and important. So we've got like internationally significant collections. We have undeniable colonial beginnings, of course, and most of the collection of great stuff is from the white men having gone and collected the other and brought it back to Dunedin. So there's no getting away from the fact that we've had a colonial part in our history, and in fact that's how we got to have such a great collection. But we are working hard to address some of the things. So a lot of the object records in Vernon are quite sparse, because they're just transcribed directly from the old registers. So they're things like 1910 adds Southland, Dr. Hocken, and that's it. That's all the information we have. And there's only ever been a few staff working in the collections in spite of the size of the collections. So at the moment we've got the biggest team we've ever had, but there's still only, in humanities, there's still only 2 curators and me, collection manager, and an assistant collection manager. So it's daunting to say the least. So acknowledging that, of course, I'm speaking as a descendant of the colonisers. So it's not obviously up to me how best to do these things, but from my point of view, thinking about this panel and stuff, decolonisation in terms of our database, I think means having more knowledge and language from the source communities added into the mix. So less about the sort of celebrating the donor who gave it to us, but more about the actual taonga and its use and its context and things like that. So we're trying to do that with our data. So in 2016, we started a 3-year project digitising our Māori taonga, with a priority being the Ngāi Tahu, so that's our more local iwi. And so we got some lottery funding for that, which was fabulous, and we got 2.5-ish full-time positions and some photography equipment. And it was proposed that we would digitise 20,000 taonga with the aim of making the images and data accessible online, where approved, where appropriate, of course. So it was a fantastic opportunity to get in there and inventory and measure and describe and photograph and condition check and stuff like that. And also, of course, we wanted to add te reo to the database so that things wouldn't just be cloak or, kit or whatever. So our curator, Rachel Wesley, was enormously knowledgeable and helpful. But we also got the Māori thesaurus from MTG Hawke's Bay that is through Vernon, which was incredible. And also great because we were able to add things to it when we found gaps, and also we added Ngāi Tahu specific terms and spellings and things like that. So with the taonga, we updated the classifications, the place names. We added associated iwi if we knew, and also in the person file, we linked people and whānau and iwi together to try and form these connections. So the part of the project was that we would also invite people from the runanga and practitioners in to help talk to us about these wonderful taonga. And in fact, because we're watching what Auckland Museum was doing, and that was really cool. But unfortunately, because we got a bit stuck with the fact that we had to smash out 20,000 in 3 years, so it actually came down a bit to just getting it done. So I feel like we missed a huge opportunity there. But it's certainly something that we know better in the future, that we need to plan for longer time, we need to plan for consultation, conversation, having people to come in and things like that. We did coincidentally at the time get this amazing guy called Isaac Te Awa. I think he works at Te Papa now. He had wanted something to do, so he came and volunteered, and was himself a weaver and incredibly knowledgeable. So he just wrote these amazing descriptions of some of our smaller textiles, which we've put into Vernon, of course. And he's written up for me a big guide to the different types of kete, which is just, this is exactly what we need. This knowledgeable person who can come in and help us like that. So I've no idea how long I'm taking, I'm sorry. It's also, so in future we want to continue this kind of thing, but we're more knowledgeable now about the fact that things take time. Also, I think when we're wanting to enhance our database with knowledge of people, it's kind of a bit naive and almost a bit arrogant of us to think that people are just going to want to come and tell us these things when it's their intellectual property. So working on those relationships and building up the trust and the fact that we really respect that kind of information, and that we are going to hold on to it and treat it with care, as well as the taonga itself, I think is really important. So we've got a new curator Māori who's Gerard Regan, who is an absolute legend, and he hasn't got onto Vernon yet. He's still in Auckland, but I can't wait to hear what he suggests we do next. That's me.
Wonderful.
That was good.
That was great. This was perfect timing as well. We'll travel next to Chanel, all the way from Otago up to Auckland. Kia ora, Chanel, would you mind giving a little bit of a background on who you are and some of the projects Auckland Museum has been tackling?
Sure. Kia ora koutou. Ko Chanel Clark tuku ingoa. Nō ngā haue whāhai. Nō te taho tuku mama no te Taitokerai, no Mitimiti, me Ngāti Prai. taho tōku mama, tōku papa, no Ngāpuhi. He hari, he koa te nākau ki te kiti a koutou, e oku hoa mahi. Kia ora everyone, nice to see lots of friendly faces today. So my name's Chanel. I, as Lisa said, I work at the Auckland Museum. I have been the curator Māori here for many, many years. I won't say how many, very embarrassing. And currently filling in as the head of human history until we can recruit someone, hopefully very, very soon. But I was just going to talk today a little bit about a project very, very similar, in fact, to Anne's project down at Otago. But I firstly just want to acknowledge that I'm just the mouthpiece or the māngai in this kōrero. There were many, many, many people who were involved in the project itself, and it had many different streams. But essentially it was very similar, and it was essentially came about as a result of our kind of Future Museum capital funding project, where we had 4 streams of work, one of which we were calling collections readiness, which I think is kind of a good term to describe a lot of this kind of getting the collections ready. I think a lot of people don't understand just what it means to get our collections to a baseline level across all sorts of things, whether that's the information, just a basic photograph even, storage. So that was kind of the catch-all phrase for these projects, and we rolled out several of them, but our project Te Awe was the first one, the kind of first cab off the rank, and that was essentially our Taonga Māori collection. So it finished in 2019, but it ran for 5 years over 2 phases. And I think probably like Anne, we were very ambitious and had high aspirations at the start, as you do with these things. And then it kind of comes crashing down, and you kind of get a reality check, and it's like, yeah, I think this is actually what we're doing. But I think if there's one thing I can say, it's just to give it a go. And I'm glad that we did. We muddled about for a long time, and I'm happy to say that what we did was an exploration. And it's by no means over. It's still at the start. But essentially we took the first chunk was what we call our whakairo or our carving collection, and that was 5,000. And there was probably a team of about 6 or 7, kind of grew to 9 people at times, and then dropped down again. And they were essentially conservators, collection technicians, storage people, and photographer. And so every item came out of the store, went essentially through this conveyor belt, and came out the other end, hopefully with a photograph, hopefully with enhanced records. And then the second phase involved our kākahu or our textile collection. So they were kind of a similar size, 5,000 for each kind of packet. So around 10, 11,000 in total for our Taonga Māori collection, which is actually quite small when you consider the significance of our collection, and it is the oldest museum. So yeah, that was kind of the project itself. But what it did allow us to do while we had the opportunity and we were taking all of these taonga out, doing this enhancement work, was to really have a good look at the way we were classifying them, the way we were storing them, the way the data was being captured and used, if at all, and where that information was coming from. So we kind of ran a parallel project kind of alongside, which was essentially this kind of exploration of what a Māori classification system might look like. So in that regard, we had the expertise of our collection manager at the time, Hakitea Harawira, and a whole bunch of other people. But I guess like I said, we just started exploring what that might look like. So yeah, and I've unleashed a whole lot of other, what does that look like from a Māori perspective if we're looking at the classification? So it was all those kinds of, once you start, it's like a Pandora's box. So yeah, that's essentially what our project was. And kind of one of the things that we did do was, which I think is what Anne was talking about, was we implemented a reference group, so a Weavers reference group, who we tapped shoulders of some of the, you know, most expert weavers across the country, Māori conservators, and brought them together to kind of just explore with us what this might mean. You know, what are some of the kupu, what are some of the terminology, and how do you structure it? You know, like this is how we might use InfoMuse, for instance, in our case, for ethnographic collections. But if we were to strip that all back, what does that actually look like from a Māori perspective? How do you even sort them to start off with? What are the categories you should use? You know, so you just throw everything out the door and just start with the blank slate. And that's essentially what it was. So yeah, I'm looking forward to hopefully answering some questions or queries people may have. But I will chuck it back in the toko to the next person.
Wonderful. No, thank you for that. I suppose next on our list is Gareth.
Kia ora koutou. My name is Gareth Seymour. I work for Ngā Taonga Sound and Vision. We're the National Audio Visual Archive for Aotearoa. Our offices in Te Whanganui-a-Para, our offices in Wellington, we're based in the same building as the National Library. We share that space with them. In my role, I support Kaupapa Māori within Ngā Taonga, our Māori development program for the whole organisation. Today, when talking about decolonisation, I'm going to be talking about one aspect of our work. I'm going to be talking about our Māori language cataloguing. We do cataloguing in Te Reo Māori as one of our work streams as a form of decolonisation. So it's not specifically titled a decolonisation work program, but when we catalogue in Te Reo, we're actually centering Mātauranga Māori, Te Reo Māori, Māori knowledge and Māori language. If the title is in Te Reo or predominantly in Te Reo, in the Māori language, we will catalogue it in Te Reo. To do that, we need capacity and systems in place. We need people in place in the organisation within our staff to be able to do that. An example of a specific project that we did is twice in the last 5 years, we've sourced funding to bring student interns in who are Māori speakers who are able to do some specialist work on some of the Māori language collection items. They've both done focused on audio collections. As an organisation, the base that we have for this decolonisation work, or this work of incorporating Māori language cataloguing into our work, is that we are what we call a kaupapa-centred organisation. Our organisation has a commitment in its constitution to partnership with Māori and to Te Tiriti o Waitangi, to the Treaty of Waitangi. And one of the work streams that falls from that commitment is the Māori language cataloguing work. So, of the little anecdote, I spoke to our subject matter expert in Vernon yesterday, who wanted to talk you through some of the kaupapa related, some of our historic Māori language cataloguing. One of the relics of the past, if you like, was that a lot of our Māori programming has been labelled ethnic radio programs. That's the genre that was used previously, and there's still some titles that are Māori titles that have got that reference, which we would now consider inappropriate. She found an example for me, and then when I looked at the data that we had for that title, it was like, oh well, I can see 2 typos in the names of the elders that are listed here. So we fixed that up. We got rid of the ethnic reference, and then she actually placed the title online because while we had an online reference, the audio wasn't available. Had listened to the audio today, really awesome. There were 4 new words, 4 new Māori words that I personally never heard. So I'm going to add those little words to my little database of words, and through this sort of process we get to revive our language through listening in this case to some elders that were speaking in the 70s about their life experiences. So operationalizing this work, it's important for us, we have a focus on gathering and including Indigenous content and where that sits within the organisation. We catalogue in Te Reo where it's presented in Te Reo. We're conscious of Indigenous data sovereignty principles. So Indigenous data sovereignty for us means that we take care with things like names. We think about what names we're going to include in an entry. We'll spell the name right. We make sure as best as we can that we have accurate and appropriate metadata that will help for example, the descendants of the speakers, the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren, to locate their ancestors and to locate their knowledge. Lisa, I'm just going to ask you to share the screen for one other title that I wanted to bring to your attention. It's a little case study. This title is Te Reo o Te Māori. It's a recording from 1967. If you wanted to search it on our database online, you just search 43796. And then down to the next page, please. It's in Te Reo. This is about 1/10 of the description that we've been able to include in the description. It's a really rich piece of kōrero discussion by an elder, Billy Larkins, in the 60s. He talks about an event in the 1960s where the square, the town square in the newly established town, Palmerston North, or Te Papiuoia, the mayor said to one of the local chiefs, I want you to give a Māori name to the square, just so that we can remember Indigenous occupation of the space. What transpired was a process that the tribes went about, and it culminated in a gathering of 300 chiefs in which they discussed what sort of name are we going to give the square. Part of the solution was, or part of the name, the history of the name that they came up with was stretched from the middle of the North Island, from Maunga Tautari, all the way to the top of the South Island around Waido, around Blenheim, and all of these connections through whakapapa, through genealogy. So the reason I included this example as a case study was that it's a really rich recording, and that being able to engage with it and to expand the metadata that previously existed from a record 20 or 30 years ago has been a really valuable experience. And for the people from Te Papiuoia, for the people from Palmerston North, to have a really in-depth discussion, if we could go to page 3, please, about Te Marae Ohine, the name of Te Marae Ohine, and how that name came about. This is just one of several thousand titles that by engaging in that material today, it gives us so much rich information about our past. The speaker in the 60s was in touch with the people from the 1800s, because those would have been the people that raised him, his grandparents and his parents. So it's a really direct connection to the past, and it's a form of decolonization to keep this history alive. So we are always aware of, in our style guides, terms that are appropriate and inappropriate, like the Māori Wars, which we now refer to as the Land Wars. We're conscious of the word Kiwi. Not all Māori, for example, identify as Kiwi, so as a collective noun for all people in Aotearoa, we're careful about the use of the word Kiwi. Visibility of te reo in our place names and our voices. The correct use of Māori words in English language content, so we don't have an S in Māori, so you don't say Māoris or Kiwis. We use macrons in our English language cataloguing so that we can help people with pronunciation, and there's also Māori subject headings that we reference, which are nationally accredited, if you like. Some of the challenges that we have, just to round off, is compliance with our Māori language approach across all staff, because not all staff necessarily recognise its importance or are aware of it. And this notion that decolonising and our bicultural practice, our kaupapa-centred practice, is everybody's responsibility. Those are some of the challenges. I'll leave it there and we'll come back to the questions later. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Gareth. Last, we'll round off to Linda. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, Linda.
Just unmute my screen there. Hi everyone, I'm Linda Connolly from the Australian Centre for the Moving Image. I must say I feel a little bit exposed being the only Australian on the panel, but here goes, and I hope I don't say anything bad. I'm going to attempt to share my screen to show a presentation that I've put together. And I hope everyone's able to see that and still hear me. So I wanted to begin by acknowledging that I'm speaking today from the never ceded lands of the Boon Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation, paying my respects to elders past and present. And this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. And that just happens to be the theme of the forthcoming NAIDOC Week, which in Australia is a week of celebration of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander history. ACMI is Australia's National Museum of Film, TV, video games, digital culture and art. We deliver a very diverse range of on-site and online programs in our galleries, in our cinemas and our labs, and through our various digital channels. At this point, even more importantly, through our digital channels, as no one can physically come to the gallery. We are also the custodians of a huge collection of moving image inherited from the former State Film Centre of Victoria. This unique collection had its genesis in 1946, and it includes Australian and international productions across a huge range of genres and subject matters and indeed forms. To widen the perspective a little, this year ACMI has developed a reconciliation action plan that we'll use across the organisation to guide our efforts to give a real and a tangible effect to our values of diversity and inclusivity, and to our belief that First Nations culture is at the centre of Australian culture. There's a couple of the values from our Reconciliation Action Plan on the screen there. And we realise this isn't a simple thing. It's quite complex and multi-layered. These are some of the statements of reflection from our Reconciliation Action Plan. And as you can see, they're quite dense. Now, there's a variety of ways in which we'll strive to achieve these goals outlined in the plan across all of our platforms, our programs and our activities. And we will especially seek to commission and collect more works that emanate from First Nations makers and communities. However, there are special challenges in how we deal with our moving image collection, arising from both its range and its age, and from the fact that we don't own our works, or at least not in the same way that in which a gallery or museum might own paintings and objects. Copyright and intellectual property rights to the works remain with their producers. We just can't remake the films we hold. Many, or most I would say, of which are entirely the product of colonialist mindsets and practices. But nor do we simply want to expunge the history that such works document and represent by removing them from public view. Many of these works contain cultural history significant to both First Nations and white Australia, even though they may make us cringe or flinch from the reality of the physical and the cultural oppressions of which they're the product. I wanted to illustrate some of these complexities by describing some of what we might call the cultural and historical layering in one specific film which we made available for public view. The short black and white film Corroboree was made by the Australian National Film Board as a record of the 1950 premiere performance and a behind-the-scenes look at the production of the ballet of the same name. The film was then acquired by the State Film Centre collection in 1952. Now, the ballet was itself seen at the time as a coming of age for Australian classical ballet, being the first one to be composed and choreographed and performed by Australians. The work and the film record of the work had good intentions. It was seeking to portray what it called Aboriginal culture as a quintessentially Australian culture, and to highlight Australian cultural practices as on a par with European performing arts. The composer, John Anthill's score, was supposedly inspired by a corroboree he'd seen as a child. The work was performed by the National Theatre Ballet Company and the Sydney Symphony Orchestra in a short but very successful season that attracted a lot of attention. Now, I'd note that the word corroboree itself is a European invention. It's derived from a word in just one of the many hundreds of First Nations languages, and then it's been misapplied by white Australia to a range of First Nations ceremonial and cultural phenomena. When I was given the task of preparing this film for public view as part of a package of short films celebrating Australian ballet, I didn't know anything about this history. And watching for the film for the first time, I was simply horrified, as I'm sure many of you are going to be now, by its misappropriation and its misunderstanding of First Nations cultural practices. So here we have a white composer, a white choreographer, white dancers, white set and costume designers, and the dancers in what is essentially blackface costuming. And they're all believing that they're participating in an authentic reinterpretation of First Nations culture. And all of this was chronicled by a white Australian film production. Now, as you can see, there's, this is a totally white cultural artefact. It's not enough to simply place a warning at the beginning of such work, and here's the warning that is at the beginning of that film. Our original descriptive cataloguing of this work, which was done when we acquired it in 1952, it just simply accepted the assertions that about the work that had been made by its creators. Now, I needed to address this for public presentation of the film in a way that was brief enough to fit on a smallish screen and to be read by a general public audience. And I also wanted to preserve the original cataloguing from 1952, because this itself is an historical artefact that illustrates a particular moment in and a mindset of white Australian cultural history. Now, luckily, this is what I came up with to try and explain to a modern audience the context of this work. Luckily, Vernon allows us to store multiple descriptions for a work, and this allowed me to reframe the work for public display while still preserving the voices of the past that had gone into its production and its cataloguing. We'd aim to do this for most of the works in our collection, but with such a large collection, we do have very real, practical and resource challenges in recataloguing all the examples of white colonialist thinking that currently inhabits our data. At least with Vernon CMS, we've got a very suitable vehicle for those efforts, so that's fantastic. One of the special challenges is that with over 250 different language and cultural groups within the Australian First Nations people, the sort of consultation that the other public panel members have talked about is a particular challenge as well. So that's just a brief, I hope, introduction to some of the issues, and back to you, Lisa.
Awesome. Thank you, Linda. I guess we'll begin a little bit of a discussion. And I think the first question that pops into my mind is, what kind of advice would you give to organizations that are beginning this journey or are coming across works in their collection that are wildly incorrect or offensive? And also for those organizations that have noticed incorrect information and have to do the hard work of onboarding fellow staff to recognize that this needs to change.
One thing I should perhaps have emphasised about ACME's Reconciliation Action Plan is the buy-in at the most senior levels of the organisation. So the Reconciliation Action Plan itself is a product of a lot of work, a lot of thought, a lot of consultation by a large group of people, and it's really been given, it's really been pushed and committed to by senior management. Now, that doesn't magically provide the resources, of course, but I think that's an important basis in terms of getting people on board, that it really needs to be owned by the organisation as a whole.
I quite liked what Chanel was saying about sort of stepping back and starting from the beginning. So whereas just sort of updating some terminology in Vernon is certainly a good start, and we've done that. It's a really good start. But to look back and actually think, is it appropriate that, you know, how should these things be presented, and are they in the right? Should they be categorised differently and stuff like that, all the way back? It was a much bigger issue, but probably quite important to have thought of from the very beginning. I'd have thought, yeah.
Maybe if I think for me it's across this whole conversation of decolonisation, whatever you want, indigenisation, whatever you want to call it. I think, I mean, Gareth hit the nail on the head when he said it's everyone's responsibility. And so I guess for me, when I think about it, I'm thinking about what it's not. So it's not asking your Māori staff member or your Indigenous staff member, you know, for assistance for everything under the sun. You know, it's not you know, it's a real, and it does start from the top, and it needs to start from the top, and it needs to be resourced, but it also needs to understand where particularly your Indigenous staff are coming from with their different relationships, and understand what they can contribute, but also understand it may not be their role. It may not be in their remit. And that's really important to understand, and to appropriately resource new staff if you need to get new staff in for whatever it may be, you know, you're doing. It's like, you know, you're the Māori staff member, so you must know everything there is possibly to know about every single tonga there is in this collection. So for me, it's very much about, and so if you stop and you take a step back and you just kind of look at what it's huge what everyone is trying to do, and you need to chunk it off, and you need to appropriately resource it, and then just give it a go. Just go from there. That's kind of my advice. But yeah, realise that it is everyone's responsibility to advance this work, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And that's, I think, what we're, you know, in our case, the thesaurus at Hawke's Bay was developed, and we've all just kind of built on these things, but also recognise our communities are really tired as well, and that all our 500 museums in New Zealand can't roll out the same kind of tapping the same people on the shoulders. We need, as a sector, to collaborate more to make it easier for our communities to contribute without, you know, putting them in the group too. But that's just kind of my 10 cents worth, which is probably bigger than the question, but Gareth might have more.
No, I think that's a fair point. I think that's something that a lot of institutions tackle, decolonization, and there's always that burden and load that we put onto the Indigenous staff and also the people that we bring into our communities, is that they have to be the knowledge holders for everything. And I think that's a really fair point of saying we can't just expect one person to be all either. And that's part of that whole community relationship building, isn't it? We've got a whole bunch of questions coming in, fast and furious. So I'll just take us through a couple of those. So the very first one we had was from Lisa Mansfield. If secret or sacred knowledge is shared to museums on collection items, do you have any advice for the protocols regarding storage and access of this knowledge in your database? Is there a way that you're perhaps hiding it from staff or only giving access to specific community members?
I can just chip in and say that we use flags. We're just using this thing of flags, for instance, in our case. Not so much sacred, but where there might be koiwi, for instance, remains, we tend to use just flagging. And at the moment, Auckland Museum isn't currently publishing our Taonga Māori collections online, because we are still developing our guidelines around the release of data. Because I think people kind of fail to understand that a photograph and the data, or the taonga and the data, they're two completely different things often. And the release of that data is another whole kettle of fish. So yeah, we don't currently, most of our fields are locked down at the moment, which is why you can't see a lot of our taonga.
So the restriction field is also, because that's an authority controlled field like the flags in Vernon, that works well for a variety of restrictions there as well. And indeed, as Paul mentioned in yesterday morning's talk, using the security structure at need is also, that's quite flexible, the internal Vernon security. So you can set up work groups that have access to specific data quite readily.
Yeah, we use that. We use the flags as well, because of course then the restriction pops up on the one line when you open the record, and obviously images and things are sacred. If they have been taken in the past, have been, because we won't now, but they have been put by a male, by our director, into a folder that is inaccessible to anybody, so no women would be able to stumble across it or anything like that. So yeah, the flag and the restriction things have been really helpful.
So we could talk about this topic for about 2 hours potentially, so I'll try and talk really briefly. We have at Ngā Taonga, we have a kaitiaki policy, or a sort of a framework, a way of approaching Indigenous knowledge and the guardianship, the kaitiakitanga, of the Indigenous people and local Indigenous people towards their taonga, the treasures that are embodied in the collection items. You can have a look on our website for some of the information about our kaitiaki policy. I'll spell kaitiaki over in the chat, but essentially it's about kaitiaki, iwi tribes and representatives of tribes having the say over, having the ability to determine restrictions, access, and the way that we record those in our databases. So, yeah.
Brilliant. There's a question for Linda here. I suppose it's because you addressed that you had the historical catalogue from the 50s. And when recataloguing and updating the information, do you keep those original entries? Do you create a sub-object record? How do you record the original catalogue entry and still update it with the more current information?
Certainly we do retain the original cataloguing, because as I mentioned, that itself is a kind of historical artefact that says a lot about the people who were dealing with the content at the time, even if it misreads the content itself. Our customisation of Vernon, I think it's in our customisation rather than a general feature in Vernon, but it does allow us to store multiple descriptions and to align those descriptions with a type. So the description type is an authority controlled field, so we can say it's an original description or a previous description and maintain that historical record along with a new reinterpreted description that's fit for publication in 2020. I hope that answers it. And doesn't cause a rush of customisation requests to VSL to give that feature. But it has been extremely useful, that feature, because it also allows us to store, briefer descriptions for publication on something like YouTube next to much more lengthy descriptions of the content for internal use or our own website use.
We have done the same, if I just chip in, for the Te Awe project that I just mentioned. We kept all of the previous card descriptions and brief descriptions if we updated them with, kind of a whole, we kind of standardised the way we were describing the Tonga, and so we still maintained and kept all of those previous brief descriptions and previous name titles, all that stuff. Because again, we're kind of putting a layer on, and unless we're digging deep into our archives and our object files, some of that information may still be relevant. And yeah, I mean, Linda's right that it's kind of a cultural artifact in itself, but it is really important to still retain, those previous descriptions. And we just worked out I think it was just I can't think of it now, but it was just and a date. So this was, the previous brief description, and we put the date, and then because it was part of the Te Awe project, you can date when the new description was added. But it's really important to maintain that, especially if you're 160 years old, like our place, and you're trying to sift through all of that information.
Well, I think there's
Yeah,
lots
we,
of sites that have the card catalogues. Oh, sorry, Anne. I think there's lots of sites that have the card catalogues, even if they don't have Vernon, they still have a lot of that historic information written on paper.
Which is still useful. You go back and look at it. So we've got a field, but now I'm thinking maybe it's a customised field called register entry, and that is a direct transcription of the original register. Spelling errors, anything we don't like anymore, still goes in there, because but we don't share that with anybody, because it might also have, donor information and stuff like that in it. But that would never be, never edited, because that's the original, no matter what it says.
Awesome. I guess another quick question is, are there any quick and practical steps that you can think of that sites can use to improve their database? I know that's always a hard answer because there's no such thing as a quick win, but if there was one project you think is just a great starting point, what would be the first to jump to your mind?
Well, I was thinking that the thesaurus was an amazing resource. On the other hand, though, as a first step, it might not be so simple, because you have all these amazing kupu that you can use, but you don't necessarily know what they mean, and if you're going to use them properly. So yeah, there might be a few steps before that.
We might be in a slightly different position because we are in the active business of commissioning works. So we commission the creation of new works, and credit to our current management. They've really made an effort to commission new works from First Nations voices, and that'll be an ongoing part of our Reconciliation Action Plan, because it's just, we have a totally white person's view of Black Australia in the majority of our collection, and let's make public the voices of the First Nations people themselves through their works, be they film or artworks, and prioritise those in our displays. and our digital channels as well. Now, not everybody's got the money to do that, obviously, but it's a good thing to do.
Oh, I think it's got
more than the museum. It's a good thing to do for the communities themselves as well.
true. I was going to say as well, I think that if any member of the public has come and said to you something about that's on display or a label and they've said this is wrong or I'm offended by this, then listen to them and fix it. That's a good start.
Awesome. Chanel and Gareth, any thoughts on that one?
That one's hard because there is no kind of quick fix. I guess for me, it's like I said before. You've got to, if your organisation is committing to a program of work like this, then start with. Don't just make it rhetoric. You've got to, if you're going to commit to doing it, and it's huge. It's a never-ending piece of work, and a lot of what we do is how long is a piece of string?
Yeah.
But you just chunk it out. You chunk it out, and I drew a little triangle this morning when I was trying to prepare for this, and thinking about what it was that we did do and what we kind of often forget. And I think we deal with, in my case, in the museum, we're dealing with physical, tangible objects. And then we're dealing with information associated with those objects. And then we're dealing with people. So it's how do you bring all those 3 points of the triangle, and how do you address them all? The object, the connection with the people or the community, and all that data, whether you have that data or they have the data or we don't, it's still to be researched. And that's across time, and the space that those time occupy. So even if you just took a simple triangle like that, that's a huge packet of work to kind of think through that. But I really do think it does require commitment from your, from your boards at that top level, and then adequately resourced so you can, so you can proceed.
I agree with Chanel. It's about the resource, it's about the structures that you have in place. So you can have a commitment, but what's the structure that's going to sit behind that commitment, whether it be in terms of staff, positions, training, leadership from management, and achieving the goals of the Indigenous or decolonisation program, in the way that as an organisation you're going to indigenize yourself or become more open to working with and recognising the mana, the authority that Indigenous peoples have over the collections and the knowledge that is sitting in those collections.
So we've had another question here from Shay Truan. It's whether the museum's Aotearoa Code of Ethics could be improved to provide more action for data to be more bicultural. So the museum's Aotearoa Code of Ethics is something that most museums in New Zealand abide by, but I do know that there's some similar guidance that comes in Australia as well. Do you think that there's enough resources and support at the moment out there to follow and to feel like you can learn from it? Or is there anything that springs to your mind on better resourcing or groups that perhaps people can go and find out more information if curious?
I'm not sure if Te Papa is here today, but I really like the fact that they get the professionals together from the GLAM sector a couple of times every year. They bring everybody together and they provide an opportunity for us to all discuss, share, debate, and wāmanga our what we have in common, what our practices, what are the developments and the different projects that we're all working on. So that's a critical way of allowing and facilitating that collaboration. So Te does that here in Aotearoa, and it's a really valuable forum to find out what everybody's doing and to have whakawhanaungatanga to collaborate and continue those relationships with them.
I was on a Zoom the other day, and one of the things I think that came out was this idea during lockdown here in New Zealand was the idea of stay local, and it was a real buzzword throughout the whole time of lockdown. And I think particularly for our regional museums is the idea of just, start small, stay local, and I mean, like Gareth said, I would have said, the services that you can get at a national level through national services, but also just to understand your own community on your back doorstep, understand them first, stay local first, develop those relationships with them first, and then, because that's going to unlock a whole lot of other things, like if you're, looking at your particular collections, or, looking at advancing the reo in your, or language use, there might be particular dialect concerns for your local region. So just, I mean, that would be the buzzword that I kind of took on for some of this mahi, is just, moving forward, is just stay local. Don't make it easy on yourself.
Agreed.
Linda, did you have anything to add from the Australian perspective on that one?
Just that I suppose that there are a number of bodies with whom ACME's reality checked the Reconciliation Action Plan, so it wasn't sort of written in a vacuum, it was socialised, and I'm sorry the name of the national group that coordinates that escapes me at the moment, but it's readily found on Google. But I'd also, and it touches on a point other people were making before about the responsibility of us all to educate ourselves, to not expect First Nations people to train us all endlessly over and over and over again. There are numerous resources, and Australia is a special case because of the huge geographical, cultural, linguistic range of First Nations people. So it ain't easy, but there's numerous resources out there, and ACME management has provided a base training for all staff provided by the Koori Heritage Trust in Melbourne. But the message has really been educate yourselves, take some time to read, to research, to try and understand the colonialist history and what we can of the First Nations history, and not just for the museum but for the country and the culture as a whole. I think that's essential for any kind of true reconciliation.
Own up to it.
Yes.
And recognise it, eh? Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Well, on that note, we've run out of time, but I just wanted to say thank you again to our panelists for giving your wonderful knowledge and your time, and also for everyone for their questions today. I think we've definitely covered just a very small fraction of a very large topic, and I would be very interested to see where we go from here, and maybe it means that we have more discussions like this going forward. But again, thank you all very much for coming, and hopefully see you tomorrow. We've got some more panels going on, small museums and cataloguing the unusual. But again, thank you to Anne, Chanel, Gareth and Linda for your time. It's very appreciated.